The Full Spectrum Podcast, presented by Champions and Legends. Champions and Legends produces hemp-derived CBD sports supplements for athletic preparation, performance, and recovery. Discover Champions and Legends on the World Wide Web at championsandlegends.com. This is the Full Spectrum Podcast with Big Data and Maverick, available wherever you get your podcasts.
Ladies and gentlemen, we kind of teased it over the last little while. We got a huge CrossFit extraordinaire on it. Here, let me give you a couple of hints. He's Canadian, and you know how much we love our Canadians. He's a 3-time podium finisher at the CrossFit Games. He's a Champion and Legends ambassador. Recent finishes at the WOD Palooza and the Rogue Invitational, taking him as number 1. Starting next week, March 11th, he is gunning to be named the fittest man on earth. Ladies and gentlemen, it's Mr. Pat Vellner. Pat, we are huge fans. Thanks for joining us.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
Awesome. Pat, I got to ask you right off the bat, you kind of asked us if we could start a little bit later because you're getting your training in, you're getting excited, and the last thing we want to do is get in the way of you. How has training been with all this COVID and all this stuff? Like, tell us how you're feeling right now, man.
I'm not too bad. You know, it's been a little bit of a longer off season, and that's been kind of good for me. I was dealing with a few little injuries and things at the end of last year, so it's been enough time to get myself put back together and feeling kind of refreshed and not so burnt out and ready to attack the new season. So I mean, it's been weird. I'm on Vancouver Island, so honestly I feel like we're doing all right COVID wise, just because there's no big city. Like I live in a pretty rural-ish area, so there's not that many big gatherings to begin with. So it's been a bit of a struggle with the gym being, open and closed here and there. And fortunately, my partner and I just moved into a house in the summer this year. So I was able to kind of build myself a good garage setup. So at the very least, I can do most of my stuff at home if the gym's closed. And then, if I need to sneak in to touch some of the luxury items there, I can always get in when there's no classes.
That's amazing. That's great. Now, I don't want to throw Big Data under the bus, but I'm going to kind of throw him a little bit under the bus. A couple of podcasts ago, you knew where I was going with it. You knew it. A couple of podcasts ago, we have this thing called the Great Debate where we kind of just ask each other questions you would ask you and your buddies if you were sitting at a bar, right? And I said, hey, who are the most profound athletes out there? He had the audacity, Pat, to say NFL guys. My answer, CrossFitters. In all honesty, Pat, you guys are tearing it up. I mean, this sport has exploded over the last few years, and it's been exciting. Can you kind of give us and the listeners, like, how did you get started in it? How do you get started on CrossFit? How do you just get into this? Like, how does that happen, man?
Well, I think it's a little different now than it was when I started, because, like you said, there's been a bit of a momentum shift, and things have picked up in the sport, and it's become a little more mainstream as a result of some Netflix documentaries and things like that. There's just been more exposure in the last, 3-4 years. So when I started it more like 6 or 7 years ago, I feel like people did it as a second athletic career. And, Big Data's not wrong. I competed in other sports. And then when I retired, this was like an outlet for me to continue to compete and continue to challenge myself. And, I think that certain types of people are just kind of addicted to that. So with nothing to compete for, I felt a little bit lost. And then, I kind of started doing some CrossFit with friends, and, things are really linear. It's like, you compete against each other. Okay, there's the CrossFit Open. If you're good enough, you advance to the next stage of competition. And then, if you're good enough there, you advance to the World Championships. And then, if you're good enough there, then you're the fittest man or woman around. And so it was really really easy to see what the next step was and get addicted to trying to, progress yourself. And there's just so many different areas to improve at. One of the cool things that I enjoyed is I was a gymnast growing up. And I played some other sports as well. Played a lot of lacrosse, played some rugby, but primarily I was a gymnast. And that's such a specialist sport that I think there was something really fun to me about stepping outside of that world and doing a sport where it was more about being generally skilled and kind of more of a jack of all trades. Can you do all of the things? It doesn't matter if you're the best at one thing. It's about being really well rounded and being able to excel across all kinds of different tests. So it was fun. When I started, I was really, really shit at a lot of stuff. So I learned really fast that I had to get a lot better at a lot of things. And there were some things I was great at and I was way ahead of the curve on. But so I got to put that stuff down and focus my energy on learning new skills again. And I'm not someone who likes to suck at stuff. So I tried to fix that as quickly as I could. And yeah, like I said, I kind of got hooked on that, and then it was a bit of a slippery slope, and then you start competing, and it's funny, you really like to do the things that you're good at. So with a little bit of success, you get even more addicted.
Now, Pat, why don't you let the more novice CrossFit listeners, such as myself, know what goes into training for the season, and then what does the season look like for yourself?
Sure, yeah. So probably the easiest way to start is what the season looks like. CrossFit is sort of CrossFit's a company, and it's a training methodology primarily, right? And then they've kind of morphed it into a sport just by virtue of the fact that you do all these different exercises, you're training lots of different modalities, lots of different times, and it's really easy to compete against your friends. You go to a class and you're all doing the same workout, and usually it's some form of work you've got to get done as fast as you can, or you've got to do certain types of lifts for max load or whatever it is. So you always push yourself against your friends, and then so that inevitably leads to the question like, well, I'm the best guy in my gym, but am I the best guy in like all the gyms? So you want to know like where's the tip of that spear, right? Like who's the best at all this stuff? So that's where the sports side kind of evolved, and they created a season where they run this online worldwide open that's starting next week. And basically, it's usually multiple weeks long. It's pretty low drag. If you're a member at a gym, they'll usually run it, or you can sign up online and do it from home or anything like that. And the company releases one workout per week, and you have to perform that workout and submit a time or a score depending on what it is. It could be anything from a combination of gymnastics type movements, powerlifting, weightlifting, burpees, that kind of stuff. And yeah, you submit your score for the week. Usually, if you're going to try to compete in the season, you should film it because they don't always take your word for it. And then yeah, so after that first section, once in the past it was 5 weeks. I think now they changed it to 3, but you submit all your scores for that open category, and they advance a certain percentage of people to the next stage. So they would invite you to go compete at another stage, which could be a live competition. You go there, you compete with judges, you compete against other athletes on a competition floor, and you do the same workouts as everybody else. And it's all about just, trying to complete the work to the given standards, faster or better than the guy next to you. And that the fun of it is that, the tests always change. So your training has to be, pretty all encompassing. You got to kind of do anything you can think of. So when I'm training to be one of the best at that, certain days of the week, I might be doing a lot of running. I could be at the track in the morning, and then, at the gym doing lots of powerlifting in the afternoon, and then swimming in the evening. Working on gymnastics, handstand skills, working on the rings, like working on high power output sprint intervals on a bike, and then later doing really long, slow, grindy work, because you've got to kind of get all your energy systems ready for whatever kind of test they could throw your way. And some years there might be, who knows, like it's a squatty competition, and it seems like every workout is squat oriented, or some events you feel like you're always pulling or you're always doing something, but typically it's pretty well balanced and everything kind of comes out in the wash. So the most well-rounded athletes tend to be the most successful across all the tests.
Pardon me, Pat, I got a question for you. When it comes to the actual event, so you've made it down to, I guess now it's in Madison, correct? Madison, Wisconsin is where you guys kind of do the finals. So take me through that weekend, I guess you can say, or those few days, because from what I understand, and from, as Big Data alluded to, for some people, they may not know this, you guys don't know what the competition is going to be until the day of, or a couple of minutes before. David Castro, your guys' architect, I guess you can kind of call him, behind the scenes guy, he like makes this crap up as he goes. I almost feel like he obviously knows what he's going to do to you guys, but it feels like it's an episode of The Saw, like, you know, the movie. It's like all of a sudden he just comes up with these unique and crazy things. Like, are you guys nervous at all? Are you ever like going into it going, man, this guy, because you know, swimming has now become a big part of it, and running, obviously, that's always been part of it. But then he'll throw out the you know, the air bikes and everything. Like, are you ever nervous going into it, going, man, what is this guy going to come up with next?
Dave's funny. He's very into the theatrics, and he would probably be so proud to hear you say that it's you know, it's like such a show and so exciting. And but it's funny. I think that the more nervous you are, it probably means that you're not. You know deep down that you're not prepared for something, so you're worried that that's going to pop up. You know, if you're really well prepared, nothing's that scary. Some things hurt more than others, but usually at the games, you're right, we don't know what's coming up. Sometimes we'll know things a day in advance. Rarely they'll give us hints, you know, maybe even as far as a week out, if there's some like very specific skills that we need to learn that like people could get hurt if they don't get a chance to practice. Like I think one year we had to do handstand push-ups on a set of rings that was like 10 feet off the ground, so they gave us a little bit of heads up on that. But yeah, I think that, you know, that's part of the fun, is you don't really know, and you kind of walk in and you just get in as good a shape as you can, and you show up and you're like, all right, this is what I got. And whatever they give you, you just do your best at. You take a good crack, and that's sort of where we spend a lot of time training. So you understand when you see workouts get announced and you've got 5 minutes to make a game plan and go out there and try to execute it as well as you can. You only get one shot, so you know, if you make a miscalculation or some sort of an error in your game plan, it can cost you a lot. And maybe that's not the best you could have done it, but you only get the one chance. So the more different variations of things we do in training, just the better you are at making those decisions on the fly, right? You've been in scenarios like that before. You might have a workout come out that you're like, you know, I've done something similar to that before, and I think it'll feel something like this, or I think that the bottleneck is at this point of the workout. So you develop a strategy according to that, and then, you know, you try to execute it as well as you can. It's funny that, you know, it's working out, right? Like it's just working out fast. But there's a lot of subtle planning and nuance that goes into it. It's not the guy who goes balls to the wall right from the start that ever wins. Mm-hmm. So, you know, we're always trying to figure out the path of least resistance. Like, how do I work less hard for more benefit? You know, like if I can win an event and work less hard than the guy next to me, it prepares me well for the next test and the next test. And I don't blow up after one day of competition, because when you go to the CrossFit Games, like the World Championships, you compete 4 or 5 days in a row doing, you know, 3-4 events a day. So you put out a hard effort, and then you've got to turn it around. You got an hour to recover, and then you've got to do it again, and then you've got to do it again. So the way you train your body to recover, the way, you know, you prepare yourself for specific events and the way you attack them might lead to better success over the course of a long weekend. Because, you know, you could come out and smash the first event and then put yourself in an early grave if you do it wrong.
Now, Pat, those words that you used, scenarios, execution, those are, you know, the big data kind of words that I love to hear.
Oh God. Here we go.
So what?
Well, those are things that it exists in all sports, right?
It's so true.
That's in everything.
It's so true. And so let's look at this from what I like to talk about when I talk about sports analytics point of view. How has, you know, analytics and data impacted your training, your recovery? And then just like you said, you know, you got to pace yourself. You need to know all these different variables on the, when you have these competitions. How, you know, what do you do to get, you know, use data and analytics to help out in your training?
I think that in the past there was less of that, and you'd have some freak athletes who were really good, and I think they intuitively understood some of that stuff, but they didn't necessarily use the data or information available to them to perform as well as they could. And I think now, in the last few years, athletes have wisened up to that, and there's a lot more use of data in training. A lot of people using heart rate stuff. We work on a lot of machines like bikes, rowers, that kind of stuff, where you can easily track progressions. You can do certain types of training where you're staying in specific zones. You're working specific paces. You can have very specific targets for different types of workouts. Even if I'm doing something like a bunch of burpees or a bunch of squats, like you can track reps per second, and you can set targets and develop different styles of interval training that's going to train you to move faster, train you to recover at certain speeds. So I think the best coaches are aware of that stuff, and they develop progressions that are going to develop over the course of the season, so that we have phases of training where you're building strength, you're building power, and then you're trying to shape that later on into what it needs to be successful at a competition. Because it's not always the biggest, strongest guy that wins things, right? You've got to be good at so many different things that you've got to kind of find the sweet spot. So now there's a lot of coaches that we rely on. Like, I have a great coach, and she is all over that stuff, and they're always reading and they're always analyzing, and I track all my performances and all of my trainings, and she gets all that data, and we make decisions based on feedback that I give, performances that I put out. We decide how to direct training. Like, maybe certain areas it's like, yeah, you're good at that now, we don't need to focus on it, we need to shift our focus here. So there's like constantly shifting. It's ebbs and flows all the time, to trying to balance all these different types of skills and energy systems that we need. So people are getting much better at it, and it's fun to see the different ways that you use it, because there's so many different tools now, and we're trying to sharpen up so many different areas that it seems like there's infinite ways to use data to your advantage, to try to make yourself better. You just have to be willing to do it.
Absolutely. Music to my ears. Sounds like you guys are doing a great job on the analysis side. How about for us, weekend warriors, the guys who crush one, maybe two workouts a week? What would you give some advice as far as what's an exercise that they'll get the best benefit out of, or what's a training tip that you can impart to the listeners to boost their workouts?
It's a good question. If you're only doing a couple a week, like, I think I guess it depends if you have goals, obviously, but I think if you're just trying to be relatively fit, I think interval stuff is the best way to do things. It's easy I think it's one of the easiest ways to stay motivated, because if you track, say, I'm going to do 5 intervals of this specific, whatever it is, maybe it's a combination of movements, maybe it's just something on a machine. You can set yourself targets, and you can really easily see if you match it, or you maintain, or if you have a significant amount of decay. So those are really easy ways to keep yourself honest. Sometimes if people just do like a really long workout, it's easy to kind of end up at a walking pace. Or if you're doing a lot of isolated exercises with lots of rest, sometimes you can just get chatty, or you lose focus, and things can take a really long time. So I think setting clocks and interval style stuff keeps you accountable. It makes your workouts faster, probably. And I think it's just a good way. Setting a clock is probably the best way to do things. And I would just say, like, most machines that are out there, like things like rowers, bikes, those fan bikes, those things are so good for general fitness. They suck to work on. I just did a ton of intervals on a fan bike, like, right before this call, and I feel ill, but they'll make you really fit. And those sorts of things, again, you can train your power output, you can train long aerobic capacity, they can have a pretty diverse target. But yeah, I think that most people would benefit from just like setting a clock, deciding what you're trying to do, and if you set yourself specific time frames or a time limit, you'll get more work done, and you'll just I think that keeps you accountable.
Maverick enjoys hearing fan bike more than anything else. It's his most prized possession in his unfinished
It
basement.
really is. And my son is always jealous of it. I don't let him near it, and I tell him, "This is your real big brother right here. Don't just take a look at it. Get away from it."
I feel like one day he's gonna actually go on it and then realize that he doesn't actually like it at all. Be like,
it's literally a machine I believe that the devil created. It is it is the greatest but worst machine.
Oh, those things will mess you up. Like it's they're rough. I feel like an unfinished basement is the perfect place for one. It's just like what you need. It's just like darkness down there, and you just kind of go in there and flog yourself.
Have you been to my house, Pat? This is exactly it.
It's also called our podcast
Pat,
studio.
Yeah, exactly. The budget, the CEO hasn't really given us a lot of money for this podcast yet. So yeah, as you can see, I got one last question before we get to the great debate, Pat. I got a question for you. When it comes, I said earlier that CrossFit has like really, really been exploding across the world. And I find it kind of funny where you guys, when you look at your stats and everything, you guys have your individual names, but then your country's flag is always next to it. Does that patriotic side of you jump out a little bit during the competition? Are you, I know you're obviously doing it for yourself, but I'm kind of curious, like when you see a Russian, and I know with you being Canadian, if you see the 72 series, like, do you hate the guy automatically or what happens? Like what's your thought process of that?
I think that it's primarily an individual sport. I'm not competing against countries. I'm competing against individuals. And I actually really like when the more countries that I see out there, I think that that's great. Again, a matter of less than 10 years ago, it was like all Americans almost, and like a handful of a couple Europeans sprinkled in. And things have just become, because like you said, because of expansion globally, it's just become a more diverse competition field, which is great. It makes me feel like it's a more true test to try and find the fittest people around, because there's more people playing. And so it's cool, and I think it's fun to like I've made some great friends from around the world just by competing against people at these various competitions around the world. So that's really cool. I wouldn't say there's any animosity between any people based on their nationality. But I think that if it's not me, I still like to see a Canadian up there doing well. If it can't be me, I still want it to be one of my other Canadian brethren. And yeah, I think that I think I would love to see a Canadian win, and would love for it to be me. And there's like, you track some of those stats. I mean, like I won the Open last year, and I think I was the first non-American to ever win the Open for the men. So like that's a fun stat. And so sometimes you collect those feathers in the cap, and sometimes your flag plays in on that stuff. But I just think the more diversity you have out there, the truer the test feels. And it's cool. You kind of get to meet people from all kinds of different cultures and different walks of life, and it makes those competitions more fun and more special to be at. And so hopefully this year we'll get to do that again.
Absolutely, we're looking forward to it, man. We're really pumping for you. Like, I'm excited. I'm so excited about this. This is awesome. Big Data, did you have any additional questions you wanted to ask?
I think we covered it mostly. One more I had though, Pat, just to let the listeners get a better sense of who you are from a sports point of view. Maverick's in his basement. He's a Green Bay Packers fan. He melts cheese all the time, and he's addicted to the Packers. I'm a weirdo Gonzaga college basketball fan, live and die with the Zags. Who's your team that you're a big fan of?
Man, it's funny. I feel like since I left school, like university, I've fallen off following a lot of sports more closely. Like I used to do all my fantasy sports with my buddies, and I just don't do it as much. So I'm not following as close as I used to. But I would say I'm a hockey fan, and I grew up in the Gretzky era, so I'm an Edmonton Oilers fan. I'm from Red Deer, Alberta, which is like between Calgary and Edmonton. So where I'm from, you're basically either a Calgary Flames fan or an Edmonton Oilers fan in the hockey world. So there's like heated rivalry in my hometown, and I was always on the Oilers side. So that would probably be my team, and I know it probably doesn't mean much to the Americans.
You know what? I'm gonna throw something at you. I know one thing about Red Deer, the Red Deer Rebels.
Yeah, that's our WHL hockey team.
There you go. So Pat, we'll finish it off with the great debate. How about this for you? You know, I said it earlier, you know, big data threw you under the bus, or your profession under the bus. So, I mean, you can yell and scream at them and beat them up if you really want. But here's the thing. When it comes to the great debate, we usually debate about those things, like we said, around the you know, the bar stools and stuff like that. You can LeBron or Jordan and all that fun stuff. But here's the one that we want to ask you specifically. With the other sports out there, what, from any major sport, any sport, a sport athlete, who do you think would be actually a pretty good CrossFitter if you had to kind of guess?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, there's some out there that I know do CrossFit, so I'll try to avoid that. I mean, I feel like it'd have to be either a football player, maybe a hockey player, because basketball players don't squat below parallel ever. And like, right. It's you like they're super freak athletes, but like those are just the judging standards. Like they would never get a successful rep because they just can't. So I'd have to like, who's like a stud, like athletic NFL player right now? Metcalf, maybe.
Oh, that's a great one. So we, on our podcast, he's such a monster. Instead of Metcalf, because a calf's a baby cow, we call him DK Met Bull.
Okay, yeah, I feel like DK could be. He's just like a good athlete, freak, and he's a receiver too, dynamic. Like he's not just like a brute, but he is also a brute. So I don't know. Somebody like that could probably be like.
Man, that's an awesome pick. That's an awesome pick.
That's a really good one.
I am gonna stick with basketball just because I think there's one freak athlete that would be able to do a lot of sports, but especially CrossFit. I'm gonna go with Zion Williamson from Duke and the New Orleans Pelicans. Right. He's 6'7". He's 280 pounds, and he has a 40-inch vertical. Looks like he could be pretty good at squats too. He's got a pretty thick frame. So I think as far as he's a unicorn in basketball, I think he'd be able to do something in CrossFit too.
He's probably never seen below parallel. That's the problem. Is like most professional sports, you want to be big. It's a huge advantage in sports, but in CrossFit, like the longer you are, it's actually a pretty big disadvantage. Like your levers are terrible for like turning over reps fast. So yeah, I know it's funny. Like that's one that I don't know. I'd take Zion
out. You know what? I think you would. Absolutely you would. And based on what you just said, I think I might have a chance. Maybe I'll see you at the Open.
Yeah. You might want to go small. Make me pick like I just don't know any sports with small dudes, like a wrestler or somebody.
Well, I'm gonna choose a guy that's on the Champion and Legends team with you. I'm gonna go with James Harrison. Find him on Instagram. This guy's a machine. Like, granted, he's 42, but this guy is just something else.
Hey, there's Masters divisions calling his name.
Hey, now you're onto it. There you go. I like it. Pat, thank you so much for being on the podcast, man. It was an absolute pleasure talking to you, and such great insight. And from us, from the Full Spectrum and the Champion Legend team, good luck next week. You're going to crush it. We know you will. And thank you again for being on the podcast.
It's my pleasure, guys.
Thank you, Pat. All the best. The Full Spectrum Podcast, presented by Champions and Legends. Champions and Legends produces hemp-derived CBD sports supplements for athletic preparation, performance, and recovery. Discover Champions and Legends on the World Wide Web at championsandlegends.com.
We should be all good. I'm not too worried about things like that. I don't feel like I have that much scandal in my life.
Yeah. Well, if you do, let us know. That's good ratings.
Yeah, exactly. It's good for you guys anyway. We wouldn't need to steer away from it.
Hey, stop interrogating him, Maverick.
hey man, this is what I do. This is what I do. No,
take that for data. The meatloaf!